mean the world won't be rewritten with AI tomorrow. It will be
Right.
rewritten bit by bit for many years to come. The GSIs have a huge role to play. I think that BPOs shifting towards doing more of that work themselves is BPOs doing a great thing for their shareholders and the future of their business. Um, I think some have done really good jobs. Others are trying to.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Deep Learning with PolyAI, the only podcast. That's right. We're just the only podcast. The news is out, Nikola. All other podcasts have faded from existence. So congratulations. We made
We made it. All right, cool.
it. How you doing today? Pretty well?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Excellent. Doing very well. You were in the news recently with a early investor and pal of yours, Nathan Benaich. Is that how you say his last name, or did I butcher it?
Yeah, I only discovered, I think his name's Benaish. I've been butchering and saying Benaish for the first few years of knowing him. So,
All right, sounds good. I'm sure he's heard worse. Anyway, you all had a nice little commentary in the tech section for Fortune recently talking about AI rollups, and I want to kind of pick your brain about some of the concepts that were laid out there. So first and foremost, what is the concept of an AI rollup strategy?
yeah, well, I mean, a roll-up in general is basically a private equity firm that, buys companies that typically do services, right, and kind of like buys them one after the other, puts them together in a bigger company, realizing some economies of scale, making it a better business, right? So that's not an AI roll-up, that's just a roll-up in general, right? Maybe you're buying, say, car washes, or you're buying any kind of services businesses, kind of like laundry services, or well, whatever kind of like business you can think of. And you're creating a
Sure.
bigger business, right? You're buying them and they're all run a bit maybe inefficiently, and at greater scale, you get to negotiate better rates with your suppliers and build a better, more efficient company. Then you increase profitability. Maybe you make it a more efficient business. If you can turn it into a bit more of a tech company or like a tech-enabled services company, maybe you get to trade at a higher multiple. So, contact centers typically trade at 5 to 7 times their EBITDA, right? And their net profit margin is like 5 to 10, maybe 15% if they're really good. Now that means, think like 100 million of revenue, 10 million of profit. You can buy the business for like 50 million, right? Now, if you could automate a lot of it with AI, right, and you make that 100 million of revenue, let's say you keep it fixed, right, but you increase the profit margin to, or really, you do more with the existing people, which is the concept that we were interested in. Um, and you automate, say, half of the work. So the same number of people now does the work of twice as many, and maybe you charge, 170 million for it, and maybe you're no longer a 10% profit margin, maybe you're at 25, 30%, right? Now, hopefully at that point, you trade a bit more like a tech company, right? So you're not trading at 5 times, EBITDA. Maybe you're trading at, 10 times revenue, right? At that point, that company's worth 1.7 billion and you only bought it for 50 million, right? So if you could marry the whole AI model, inject the AI, kind of like fairy dust into a services business, if you can make the whole thing really work and you have a bit more of a tech company or even something in between, you'd make killer returns, right? And then if you can prove the model, you do what private equity always does. You lever it up, then you raise, say, another 200 million, you borrow 600. For 800 million, well, like you could buy a really, really big BPO. You might even be able to buy most of them, right? Or like, well, most of the large ones individually. And at that point, you're dealing with billions of revenue and you can do it again. You've just found a shortcut to creating like the biggest AI company in the world. That is at least the theory that I fell in love with in 2019. I distinctly remember pacing around one of the meeting rooms we had in Whiteberry Yard in Clerkenwell back in 2019 and speaking with Sri Chandrasekhar, who is our longest standing board member. I think maybe we could even look to do a podcast episode with Sri and Nathan.
Sure.
And
Okay, sure on.
I remember Sri saying, in his very distinct tone, kind of like, well, why don't we just buy a contact center? And I'm like, well, why not? Right. And that's, group think right there, where we're like, okay, like, how can we do it? Right. And I spent 6 months around north of England, in Scotland, a lot of time in Glasgow, in Edinburgh, and fascinating businesses, right? I think that when you get like a glimpse and then you spend months looking at processes and stuff, it really, you build an appreciation for what it is that we're trying to do here with AI, with the software technology, right? And you realize that it's not just about AI being this or a bit better or a bit better. Like I mentioned, I think in our last episode, it really is CapEx versus OpEx. Like how much work is that business, the enterprise that's paying that BPO for that labor for OpEx, right? How much are they willing to invest in their own transformation so that they can now do this with AI, right? And I think the equation has changed since then. More can be done with AI, and the ways of transformation have maybe changed, but less so, right? So the equation still stands very much to this day. Our conclusion was that it was threefold, right? The first one and the most important one is that you have to align the incentive, right? The reason that existing BPOs, the likes of Teleperformance or many others, almost any one of them, right, will find it hard to do this is that they're there to provide human labor, right? So if they automate that
Right.
labor, they are eating one size of their revenue to grow another. And the other may trade at a higher multiple, but it's going to take the market a lot of time to like appreciate the mix and reward them for that. And it's a hard thing to do for a business that's so operationally heavy, right? So what you would need in that case is just the whole outcome-based model of a BPO. So say you have your business, you get, I don't know, 10 million calls a year, and I say, Damien, I'm going to do that for 5 million a year. And I promise you that your CSAT is going to be at least, 4.3 out of 5. You go like, okay, cool. If it's not, what? We figure out some penalties, we shake hands. And then I realized that you didn't tell me everything. Maybe there's double the calls and I didn't negotiate right. And I'm in a real pickle, right? And then I start losing money. I'm like, Damien, man, look, I can go chapter 11 right now, or we can like renegotiate. And you're like, what's the equation between like this person going bankrupt and then like you switching to someone else versus giving me a slightly better contract? Then you realize that it's really like the daily reality of a lot of this business, right? It's a lot for a startup to wrap their head around because the DNA of a BPO is so strong, so labor intensive, and so difficult to the business. I have
Yeah.
so much appreciation for what they do. And, like the Scotsmen that I met, like in Glasgow working on this, they're phenomenal. I really enjoyed spending time with them. They're a lot of fun. Glasgow has pubs open till 3 a.m. and it's a phenomenal place, right? I had a lot of fun. Um, it's really hard to rewire that business into a tech company. It won't just happen overnight, right?
Did you
So
did you think that was the case back in 2019? Because obviously, as you mentioned, part of the history of our company is that you said no to purchasing a contact center, to purchasing a small BPO.
so as I was with Nathan in New York 3 weeks ago, and we're talking about this, and I was like, well, look at the board deck. He was talking about writing this article, and I was like, well, this is probably the most thoughtful piece of work I've ever done, right? So number one, BPOs have offered this kind of pricing and then failed, right? Like they ran each other into the ground and then kind of like moved back from it. It's not very common to see outcome-based pricing. The second bit is where it gets harder, right? Uh, IT integrations, right? People assume that if you buy, and there was I think the CEO and the CPO, one of the companies doing this right now, right? Backed by one of the leading venture capital firms, commenting that you then just buy it as an accelerant. Well, to accelerate what? Because their claim was that you need to change that it's hard to change the way that people work at a BPO, but if you buy one, then you have more control. That's great, but it's also incremental because the real issue was this. You go into automate, and then you basically have to convince the enterprise that you're working for as a BPO that this AI system you're going to put in front will do the same work that humans will. And to do that work, it needs access to their backend systems, right? Now that access either exists or it doesn't, but they need to work hand in hand with the IT team of that company to get that done, right?
Sure.
And to date, as we work on digital transformation of companies using AI, we are really just often stuck against days and weeks and years of being able to figure out what we can do, when and how, and then we kind of like go through those changes. And we have the luxury as a tech company of filtering to those companies that have opted to work with us. Um,
Right.
Many do, most don't, right? It's a sales funnel. And we're filtering for the most innovative people who have the most to gain. If you're a BPO or you buy a BPO, you're not, that filter does not apply. You just have the general
Right.
public. You then have to sell inside that, which means that basically most of the revenue you buy will be that because they won't want to move. Unless what you're doing is not full on automation and the vision that we have of 90% of customer service being automated. Instead, you may be talking about the other category of AI products for the contact center, which is agent assist. Make humans more efficient so that you can pay them even less and they can churn and you bring in new ones and they're kind of okay from day one. That's the pitch of a lot of the agent assist platforms. And it's one that we don't really believe in because we think that you kind of have to do the hard thing to benefit the most as a business. It means that we work with businesses that have the most to gain in terms of revenue generation or in terms of the uplift of customer service, which has collapsed because they just can't afford to have as many people. If it's incremental, if it's about like saving 10% of the cost or making the service just 5% better, that's not that interesting, right? And that is something that you can do at scale with technology because it means that you're not actually replacing the human. The human is there, clicking through, and it's kind of like an autopilot for them where their average handling time may not be 6 minutes. They might be able to be done in 4.5 minutes, right? Because you bring up the right answers, you tell them the right thing. Maybe you can get them to be better at converting certain leads and this or that. But like the more knowledge heavy and difficult a call type is or transaction type, the less likely it is to be outsourced as well, right? Because you hear of people outsourcing customer service. You don't hear of many people outsourcing sales, right? So those more valuable things where automation can be really good for some of those call types, like that's not something that's a small lift on top. That's like really a transformation that to do it, you have to get them to buy in. And to get them to buy in, you have to get them to buy in, right? You don't get to buy that business by buying the right to be the one provisioning the labor, right? And that's kind of at the end where I looked at it and with a heavy heart, I was like, okay, I guess we're not going to have, you know, a case study named after me and 3 year board member who decided to bag the play. And we walked back, right, from the whole thing. And
Okay.
yeah,
So that was okay. So that was 2019. And like you
yeah,
said, there were some of these traps that, I think at the time were highly visible that the pricing trap, right? The self-cannibalization, that illusion of control, the integration cost and expenditure that would come into staffing then. Do you think that some of those have pretty much weakened as generative AI technologies have gotten stronger? Do you think it's easier to go in and plug and play some
no,
sort of let's talk in the framework of AI type rollups,
no,
right? Where AI is
no.
the central. You don't think so?
No, not at all. I think that there's one that's changed a little bit, but not fully changed, right? The pricing stuff hasn't changed at all, the first piece.
Yeah,
The
sure.
second piece, the integration piece, there are technologies on the horizon, things like OpenAI's operator, where instead of building like, back-end hooks into the systems and figuring out how to do that, that may not exist right now, and then maybe that CapEx that I'm talking about,
Mhm.
you just have a tool that if you let it loose on the agent screen can do all that. Like at the moment, it's neither reliable enough nor fast enough, but it will get there, right? Now it
Sure.
will get, but that increases further the risk associated with letting an autonomous AI system run amok and like just do that work on your behalf. Now, being the AI fanatic that I am, I think it'll work eventually, right? Um, but by that point, like the IT thresholds to kind of,
What is that point? When you say eventually, what do you mean?
it's really hard to make these predictions right now. The barrier right now, like, I'll be ever as optimistic. I think in 2 years' time, at most, we'll have systems that are fast enough to like do the whole scan of the agent screen and be like, okay, I've seen how humans do it. I'm gonna click here, here, here. Then I'm gonna click Alt Tab, and then I'm gonna like go into this screen. I'm gonna paste this thing there the way that a human would, tick, 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 and I'll do it faster than a human. If the system will
Sure.
allow me, like give me some waiting screen or something, or whatever. I'll do it as fast as a human could. Like that will come, right? But then like you'll again have a bit of an extra period of enterprises accepting that someone can just do that with AI on their behalf. Because the first time that the thing accidentally, transfers money to the wrong account, which it will do,
Sure.
then you'll get like, oh, we have level 4, but we can't have level 5, right? And then again, like the onus of doing all that AI transformation work with a human still being there to supervise, it's not going to be all that appealing, right? So we're already like growing super fast and achieving transformative outcomes when we just rebuild it from scratch. Because that's the whole like age-old thing. Will existing incumbents transform with technology, or will new entrants come in and completely supplant them because they don't have those dependencies, right?
Right.
I bet on the latter thing. I think that there is the mirage of multiple expansion, which is just too hard to resist for all these Wall Street buccaneers and VCs alike. Not necessarily the real VCs of like, like small few hundred million fund that invests looking for like standout returns relatively early stage, but venture capital firms have changed, right? They're managing more and more money and they're really converging with private equity at this point, right? So for a lot of those guys, why not, right? And maybe they get really lucky and get like a standout, like multiple expansion story where the thing is a fund returner for a $2 billion fund. Well, why not, right? And good luck to them. Look, I think that anyone working on this to create a world in which people believe in these outcomes even more so we can all do a lot more good work, but good luck.
Mhm.
I hope someone manages to do it because it's going to be a great story and it'll give me something to kick myself about for the rest of my life to make it work because it will be a shortcut to mushrooms. But it is unclear to me. I would still not bet on it
And what would you say is the top reason that you wouldn't bet on it right now?
because they don't have free reign. Again, like you buy a BPO and you go, okay, like I now am licensed to provide all the human agents to a telco or someone else. And then I go in and I say, hey, like, I'm going to put AI in front. They're like, cool. You know what happens when you put in some technology as a BPO? A really hardcore procurement person, the most evil, evolved form of the procurement person that exists, is brought into the room and the lights are turned off. And they say, well, how much do you expect to make from this thing? Oh, no, I think the savings are 100 million. Cool. Really? Nice, nice. You can have 10. You're like, wait, what? I'm doing all the work. I'm taking all the risk. Yeah, and you can make 10 million. You're like, well, I don't get it. Like, it's just culturally not acceptable for a BPO to make out like a bandit with
Yeah.
like big outcome, right? Then, you might, if you bring in an equally, sturdy negotiator, you'll walk out with 20, right? And then in the meantime, you're taking all the risk. You're doing all the work. God knows what it's going to take to move them through. And they're not ready to commit. And at any point, they're, because the real thing that I found almost offensive, if I'm honest with you, was just like the attitude of you, a BPO, are going to sell me AI. Come on, like move on, right? Like
Yeah.
I
Okay.
need 10, I need 10 more agents in week 3 and another 10 in week 4, right? And there was just like this really wide chasm between like what the BPOs themselves wanted to do to reinvent themselves and what the clients were willing to look at them and kind of like buy from. And I realized that in each of the conversations in the early ones where we kind of like went in and partnered, they would very quickly just contact us directly and be like, hey, let's talk. Like, because they knew that whatever they pay us, they're going to have our undivided attention because, a few $1 million for an AI vendor in the early stages is a lot. But for a BPO, it's like, well, it's not all that much, right? Because they're
Right.
charging tens of millions just at a very low margin. So it's difficult, right? And I think that it's just, if it was such an easy good idea, you'd hear more about it, right? So I think that the BPOs were
I mean, you're starting to hear a little bit about it, I would say. There's a mindset, especially among some of the larger BPOs out there, ones with big contact center plays that are investing in that. I mean, Tata's CEO announced last year that they were putting most of their R&D into AI services and converting to a service organization as opposed to a traditional BPO because they know that's where the future is going. So at
so I
least
there's more than them. And Tata, has always been a big player in like general IT, like services provision space, not just in like BPO for contact center, right?
sure.
They're all talking a lot about it. Like a cynic might say that it's like sprinkling AI fairy dust on themselves, hoping that it does something to their unbelievably depressed multiples. An optimist might say that they're genuinely pivoting, and some of them really are. Like I think that's a fair thing to say about Tata, about Concentrix, about a few others that have really moved on to kind of like being much more of a consulting company where it's like,
Yeah.
IT transformation services, development, co-owning like tech stacks, owning outcomes over tech stack transformations. Look, that's fair. That's like the transformation of their business. But make no mistake, those are now like consulting companies, right? They're more like a Capgemini or an Accenture than they are their previous shape. And that's okay.
But they're also doing the implementations, right? So if that's the case, aren't they acting more like professional services in a software company if they're coming in and it's not just process change and it's not just
No, but that is what Accenture does. That is what Deloitte does. That is what Capgemini
right?
does. So I think, the more you see a lot of these previously more kind of like BPO outsourcing style companies pivot towards this space, you're just going to see more crowded space. And listen, AI is hungry for like forward deployed things for professional services inside these companies
Right.
because you need to map out the world, you need to like codify it, and then allow AI to run over it and do the work that humans did previously. So um, this is going to be a huge space. Like I think that
Yeah.
someone told me recently, like the company that's made the most money out of AI so far, beyond a shadow of a doubt, is Accenture. Not even like a Google or a Microsoft, right? But Accenture, because they
For
are
NVIDIA?
okay, fair.
Okay.
But fair, right? But like, I'm probably not more than I don't know. We should look at the numbers, right? But
It would be to kind of take a look at those numbers because, but also it's funny to see that those consulting and service organizations are making a ton out of that, are making a ton out of this evolution because, and that's going back to something that was quoted from the Fortune piece about service businesses. They quote, aren't inefficient by accident. They're inefficient by design. The inefficiency is the product in that you're basically baking in that level of customization that can't be attributed by like an internal team using a widely offered product or a widely offered service and
yeah,
like trying to drill down to their specifics. So is this, what is with the recursion? It seems that you're getting a tech accelerated, I don't want to say step back in process because you would think that technologies would better enable individual organizations to optimize for their own purposes. But instead, it's enabling service organizations to come in and still offer that initial value prompt, which is, a throat to choke if all goes wrong, or someone to ignore if all goes right. But it's better enabling when you're doing the
yeah.
mission. Yeah, if it goes right.
I mean, listen, I think there's also just like my co-founder Sean will tell you that it's the absence of a widely scaled enough citizen developer inside these organizations that is in your way.
Oh, interesting.
Which is why they have to kind of like go after these PS orgs like Accenture that really just have people who, and like we do a lot of work with companies like that, right? Without naming anyone. And they're making forward investments into training up their teams to use platforms like PolyAI to do this work, right? So I think they're a massive conduit for this technology finding its way into the market. And they can do that because they work with those companies on their tech stack across all departments, across customer service, sales, IT, HR. So they know these systems. So if we are to be successful, if our technology is to be successful in transforming that business, there are few people better than a GSI firm that know the lay of the land, the people, the processes, the roadblocks, who can kind of go like, this is a good thing to go after. This, let's wait a little bit because this project comes in 2 years' time. We'll change all that, and then the geography will be different. Then we can like roll over that as well. So look, I mean, the world won't be rewritten with AI tomorrow. It will be rewritten bit by bit for many years to come. The GSIs have a huge role to play. I think that BPOs shifting towards doing more of that work themselves is BPOs doing a great thing for their shareholders and the future of their business. I think some have done really good jobs. Others are trying to. There's a bit of that like AI fairy dust attempts with those that are very labor intensive. Some of it, I wish them luck. All forms of AI adoption is good for us, and we're allied with all of it. But there is really the whole like, are you a disruptor changing it fully and rebuilding the whole thing? or are you trying to like take an already inefficient human heavy cranking thing and keep yourself dependent on it by making it a bit more efficient so that you don't have to do the other thing?
Right. I think that makes a ton of sense. Awesome. Well, we're running up on time today. For those of you who listened or watched, we'll make sure to link that Fortune article so you can take a look at what we were referencing for today's episode. Really, really thought-provoking piece. Good stuff in there. And Nikola, pleasure as always. We'll catch you next week.
Likewise. Thank you, Damien. See you later.